Arguably, one market-based solution to market-based problems is the tort law. What is the tort law? Tort law refers to a branch of law in which people sue other people for damages. So lightning strikes a tree in your yard, it falls on your neighbor's house. Well, your neighbor is able to sue you for the damage that your tree did. Now note, in tort law, we're not necessarily saying that the person acted illegally or even wrongly. Right? It's just that you act in ways that cause damage to other people, so you're expected to compensate them for the damage that you caused. Why would tort law provide a market-based solution to market-based problems? It's because tort law, in many cases, shifts costs back onto people who make decisions. To illustrate this, I like to use a case called Escola versus Coca-Cola. It's a classic tort law case. Escola was a waitress who picked up a bottle of Coke one day and shook it, and it exploded in her hand. It was determined that Coca-Cola had not done anything irresponsible. Apparently, at least given the mechanisms at the time, if you fill glass soda bottles, occasionally one's going to explode. Right? It can't be completely prevented, and I don't think it can be predicted. Right? So it was determined that Coca-Cola had not acted irresponsibly. And yet, they had decided to produce bottles of Coke in glass bottles and distribute those. Because they'd made that decision, knowing that it incurred this small risk, they were expected to pay for it. Now, in a way, this makes a certain amount of sense. There's several justifications for why that would be acceptable. Here's one of them. Suppose I am told, well, you could buy glass Coke bottles, but there's this incredibly minuscule chance that it could explode in your hand. Am I going to care? No. Right? But of course, nobody's going to care, right? Because the chances are too small, and we're going to get this damage done to people. But suppose we shift the cost back onto Coke. Suppose we tell Coke, okay, you're producing the bottles. This is going to happen. Right? This is going to happen in some cases. Here's the prediction of about how much. Right? And let's say there was some extreme, they could either quit producing Coke bottles, or maybe let's assume for the sake of argument, there could be some extremely expensive process for preventing this. Right? Well, it's not immediately obvious that Coke ought to go through the extremely expensive process, particularly if this just injures and doesn't kill. Right? We have to accept a certain amount of risk. Right? And all of us agree in our personal lives that there is some amount of risk we're willing to undergo for other kinds of benefits. Right? If you don't think that, then I would assume that you never get in a car. Right? Actually, you probably live out in a cave in the woods because living in a house with a stove means it could explode or burn down, etc. Right? So almost everyone in our society is willing to take on certain small risks for certain benefits. Right? But if we shift the cost back onto Coke, then Coca-Cola, then the company is going to say, all right, we're putting out this product. Here's the prediction of how much damage it's likely to do in the next year. Here's the cost of the damage. Right? Is the cost of the likely damage, right, great enough to discontinue, relative to the profit we get, to discontinue producing Coke bottles or to add on this incredibly expensive thing? Right? And of course, remember, down the road, we expect that the incredibly expensive machinery to prevent this will be passed on to the consumers in increased costs. Right? So here's the idea. Right? The idea is that by shifting the cost back onto Coke, right, we get a more rational economic decision. Right? Now, this is assuming, of course, that other parts of the pricing system are working correctly. Right? We're assuming, for the sake of argument, that the price of Coke more or less reflects the price that people are willing to pay for it. So suppose there were an expensive set of machinery that could prevent it, and that was going to lead to an increase in the price of Coke. Right? Well, that might be something that customers don't care about, at all. Right? It might not be enough to faze any customer, in which case Coke presumably has an incentive to say, okay, we're going to go ahead and bear the costs. But the idea is, if the rest of the free market is working properly, and companies can be sued and required to pay for the damages they cause, right, they're going to be more likely to make rational economic calculations about whether or not the problems, right, or the losses from stopping the activity altogether or modifying it in expensive ways, right, is justified by the costs that they'll avoid. Right? So they'll be in a position to say, okay, these are the costs it imposes on others. We're going to have to pay for that. Now let's make a rational assessment of whether stopping the activity or altering the activity to avoid the problem, right, is worth it. Right? So that's a market-based solution to a market-based problem.